Hello, and welcome to the Divorced Dadvocate, divorce support for dads, where we help dads create a healthy and less traumatic divorce. My name is Jude Sandoval, and I'm your host. I created this podcast in the Divorced Dadvocate community as a result of my own high conflict divorce, and because you as a dad deserve all the resources necessary to thrive through this challenging time. I encourage you to check out our website at thedivorcedadvocate.com, where there are resources that correspond to this episode, as well as free access to our membership community, where you will find live meetings, free workshops and courses, private discussion groups, and more. And now on to this week's episode. And we've got a great show today. It is our latest installment of the sister podcast, Dads Dating After Divorce. And Rolf and I chat with the author of the Tactical Guide to Women, Dr. Shawn T. Smith. But before I roll that, just a reminder to download the Divorced Dadvocate app. You can do that at the website under Get the App tab at thedivorcedadvocate.com, or you can do that directly at thedivorcedadvocateapp.com. And then also the divorce quiz is still up, and it's a great opportunity for you to gauge where you're at in your divorce compared to others who have gone through it. And you can find that directly at thedivorcequiz.com or again on the website under the tab Divorce Quiz. So check out those two resources. They are very, very awesome. And now the latest installment of Dads Dating After Divorce.
Of your own movie. If your life was a movie and it started now, forget about whatever financial disasters you've had, personal failures, relationship failures. What would the hero of your life's movie do right now?
Hello and welcome to Dads Dating After Divorce. My name is Jude Sandoval, and I am one of your hosts and the founder and creator of the Divorced Dadvocate community. And my colleague here is...
My name is Ralph, but I go by the pen name DSO, which stands for Dad Starting Over. I'm the founder of dadstartingover.com and the men's group called the DSO Fraternity. And I've also authored several books, including the popular one titled The Dead Bedroom Fix.
And today, our guest, I'm unbelievably excited about. I've followed him for many years and have had a great conversation with him on my podcast in the past. And his fascination with psychology began as a child growing up in the family-owned bar, of all places, where he watched his father diffuse all manner of problems. And he knew then that he had found his calling. He earned a BA degree in psychology and communication from the University of Colorado at Denver, as well as a doctorate in clinical psychology from the University of Denver. His clinical training has included the treatment of trauma, substance abuse, and traumatic brain injury. And he took an early interest in treating anxiety disorders and working with couples. He's been in private practice since 2008, and he's the author of several books, including the one we're going to be primarily discussing today, which is The Tactical Guide to Women, How Men Can Manage Risk in Dating and Marriage. Welcome, Shawn T. Smith.
Well, thanks for having me, guys. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for being here. And Shawn, you're wildly popular across the internet. I don't know. I mean, I'm sure you might know that a little bit. And I found you years and years back, and I follow your blog and follow your website, and I've read your book. This book is absolutely phenomenal. Like I was saying offline, that it should be basic reading for any teen male that is starting to date or a young man that's starting to date, but it is definitely one that I've recommended multiple times on my show and also to men in my private practice as well. And so tell us a little bit about yourself and then kind of what led you to write this book. And I know you also have a companion book for women.
Yeah. What led me to write the book, and thanks for pointing out that, I would also like to see young men read it, because part of my motivation for writing the book was to cover the things that I wish someone had told me when I was younger. And the reason I wrote the book was, as you mentioned, I've been in clinical private practice for a long time now. And something compelled me when I was working with men early in my career, and they would talk about relationship problems. I just started wondering, who taught you about relationships? Who taught you how to pick women in relationships? And the answer invariably was no one. We're left to sort it out for ourselves. And that usually involves a whole lot of mistakes. And so the reason I wrote the book is to just hopefully just cut out some of those mistakes for anybody who is looking for a little bit of strategy.
Right. That's, man, I saw Ralph shaking his head, and I was definitely shaking my head. And it's not something that's taught in school. And if you don't have a strong male figure, which I would argue that these days we have less and less of, unfortunately, then you kind of learn on the go, and then you end up being me in my 50s, still making mistakes, and going back to your book and referencing like chapter 6, personality disorders, and how to deal with somebody around that. So our stability, right? That's chapter 6. So I'd like for us to just kind of chat with the dads and have an open conversation about the 3 parts of your book. The first being risk management, the second being the bright triad, and part 3, how to avoid completely effing up your life. And maybe through each of those, I know that first part really talks about self-development, and take us through that so we can give some tips to the dads that are getting out there again after their marriage ends, and how we can help them to kind of mitigate some of the risks that you mentioned quite often and throughout the book.
Yeah. Well, that first part of the book is about it is about finding what the reason that you're on the planet before you start taking on passengers, so to speak. And I'm curious if you guys think that it's equally applicable to guys who are more established in their 40s and 50s. But I wrote that section with younger men in mind, 20s and 30s, because I think what a lot of guys do is they will pick their relationships without thinking, how does this woman fit into where I'm going in life? And one of the challenges for young guys, it's pretty rough being a young guy, because you have this sense that the world is expecting something of you. And it's pretty clear that every society throughout time and across cultures expects young men to provide something. We don't get the free ride that women and children do. We don't need to, but there is that expectation. But if you're a young guy, a lot of times you have no idea what it is that you're here to do and what your purpose is going to be ultimately. And so if you're choosing relationships and women before you figure out what your values are, you're kind of setting yourself up for a lot of conflict down the road, because the values will start to collide, and your sense of purpose will start to collide with what her sense of purpose is, unless you happen to get lucky and you pick someone that it turns out aligns with you. But luck is kind of iffy strategy. But I'd be curious if you guys think that that's something that older guys, 40s and 50s, 60s, coming out of divorce, do you think it's a equally applicable question?
Yeah, I do, if I may. It's interesting that what we're describing, and if you agree, Shawn, or not, is a very pragmatic way of looking at relationships. Does this person fit? This is what I, as a man, prescribe for the ideal mate, and she needs to fit in these parameters. That is ironically something that I think women innately do when they're looking for their man. Is he going to be a good provider for me? Is he going to be able to protect me? Is he going to be fill in the blank? While for men, from my experience, it is basically, is she pretty enough? Not too pretty, right, because that scares a lot of men off. Ask any supermodel type person. And does she like me? And that's about it.
Yeah.
And a lot of men think, I found my soulmate in math class in 7th grade.
That's it. Is she pretty and does she talk to me?
Pretty and does she talk to me? That about summarizes it. So we're telling these men post-divorce, that old playbook that you had, that is a big reason why you got in this mess that you're in the first place in your 40s and 50s. So it's a different world, dude. And frankly, it's some people think the rules are completely different now, and this is a completely different landscape that we're in with dating and everything else. I need to go into this with a new mindset. Well, technically, you needed to be in the same mindset some 30 odd years ago when you met your first wife. The rules, I guess the ground rules haven't necessarily changed. So if you want to have a good dating life going forward and possibly find Mrs. Right, you're going to need to be a little bit more pragmatic about this thing and look at this you don't want to say a cold point of view, but not an overly romanticized point of view, I guess is a better way of saying it.
Yeah, I think you use the word pragmatic, and I think that's the right word. There's a couple things in what you were just talking about. One is your old patterns, your old playbook, as you said, your way of doing relationships, the way you organize yourself around other people. That's one. And it's a big one for guys coming out of divorce, because you hear that the rate of second divorces is higher than the rate of first divorces. And the rate of third divorces is higher than second divorces. The more times you marry, the more likely you are to get divorced. But there's a huge caveat to that. The guys who figure out what they brought, just objectively, what they brought and what the other person brought, because it's easy to err on the side of the other person's the bad guy or I'm the bad guy. Guys, people will make those two kinds of errors. So if you can get a reasonable assessment of what you brought into the relationship without taking on too much or too little responsibility, then your chances of succeeding in the next marriage skyrocket. And I don't have data for that. That's just sort of my clinical observation. But then the other piece, aside from your relationship patterns and your playbook, is your vision of the world. And I don't know if you guys are familiar with Thomas Sowell. He's an economist, but he wrote one of his many books is called A Conflict of Visions. And in this book, he talks about two ways of viewing the world. And there's not the only two ways. It's just the only two ways that he talks about in this book. And there's the vision that aligns roughly with Democrats and the vision that aligns roughly with Republicans. But what he's saying is that beneath your political orientation is your philosophy and your ideology. And beneath your philosophy and ideology is your vision and the way you see, it's basically the way you see other human beings and the way you see the world should be. And your vision of the world, taking it away from the realm of politics, the way you see the world informs every decision that you're going to make, from your view of money to your view of education to the view of how you're going to raise your children. And if your vision is not aligned with her vision and vice versa, then you're just setting up a field of conflict for everything that comes along and not even really understanding where that conflict is coming from, because our vision of the world is so transparent to ourselves, because we're the fish in water. Basically, we can't see our vision of the world unless we start thinking about it. So getting a clear sense of where your values lie and where her values lie. I think when I've worked with older guys coming out of their first marriages, that continues to be an issue for them, that they haven't really thought about their values and their vision of the world and how that may or may not sync with somebody else's values and vision.
Yeah. And you covered a lot there. And I wanted to go back to your first point too, which was take the time to learn to understand what you brought to the relationship, what your part was in the relationship. And to do that, do you feel like you need to take time off from dating after your divorce to be able to clearly to work through that, to understand that? Or do you feel that you can do that in getting in relationship again? Because the big question I get from guys a lot is, oh, I want to get in a relationship that's going to help me to understand myself better. But, is that positive? Is that negative? Do you see something in your practice that's one way or the other is better?
Yeah, that's a wonderful question, because I don't think there's not a uniform answer. I think it depends. The only time I would say it's probably not a good idea to do that work within a relationship is if you've been using relationships as an escape and as a comfort for yourself. But at the same time, how do you practice relationships without being in relationships? So maybe there's some guys for whom a little break is necessary because they're not able to really function fully on their own. And I do think that's an important piece, to be able to function on your own, so that you're not coming in with a sense of desperation and this relationship is my savior and my rescue. That's a pretty dangerous mindset.
A lot of men that I talk to, they may not be so heady about, I'm desperate and I don't know how to function without another human being, but it's just that they are in relationship mode. That's all they know. And they've known relationship mode for 20 some odd years, husband, wife, staying at home, watching TV every Friday. And they want that back more than anything. It's just something that they're familiar with. The single life of going to clubs and bars and it's just, I don't like that. So when they find one that, again, she's somewhat nice and she's kind of easy on the eyes, I will make her wife number 2, like 2 months after I've divorced wife number 1. And they don't look at it as treating the woman like a human Band-Aid. All they look at is, I just feel comfortable. This is what I know, and this is what I like. And she likes that too. And here we go. And from what I've seen,
Band-Aid, I like that.
About 9 times out of 10, it doesn't end very well because he hasn't worked through the issues of, you just need to work on yourself, take a time out, think about all these things, stop using these people as human Band-Aids. Sure enough, there's a codependency thing going on here. You need to, what's wrong with being a single dude and date around for a while if you want to do that? But with the caveat of also there's these other guys that when I say just date around for a while, as soon as they find one, they wipe the slate clean of other dating candidates and say, I'm going to focus on this one, and it's only this one, and get their heart broken, and they go back into their cave and hide for a while because they're heartbroken again. So I guess a case could be made. Jump in the deep end of the pool, learn how to swim, or just take your time, figure out, what's going on between the ears and get that straight first.
Yeah. And I think the unifying concept there is figuring out what your motivations and your behaviors are. And if you can do that in a relationship, okay. If you need to do it outside of a relationship, okay. But that's the task.
Yep. Yeah. And what you described, Ralph, was exactly me. I just was in relationship mode, got back into another relationship. That one didn't work. Got into another one. That didn't work. Got into another one. That didn't work until I finally said, oh, okay, there's a common denominator that was working here. And that's me not knowing what it is that I'm bringing that's causing all these relationships to fail. And so I need to stop. I need to really take some time and then really go through I call it the seasons, going through a full year of seasons by myself with my family. And I feel like that is a particularly good way to go about it, like right after a divorce, when we're talking with dads and I'm a dad, in being able to adjust to a new life with children as a single father, et cetera, without having a distraction of another romantic relationship in there that might be so heavy for you. So comment on that, Shawn.
Without the distraction of another relationship. Yeah. So it sounds like what you were doing is you were doing that work of figuring out your relationship patterns. And it sounds like if I'm hearing you right, that for you, it needed to happen outside of a relationship.
Yes, for sure. Well, I needed to do what you said, which is really take the time, understand what I value, what I want to create my vision and direction for my life, and then be able to create that life, and then bring somebody in that can complement that and be part of that without me having to do that in the context of the relationship, of that being part of it. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Or the driving force behind it.
Yeah.
Yeah. A relationship can be very distracting from your overall quote mission as a guy. When you're head over heels in love, especially when you're fresh out of a divorce and you're hurting so badly and you're traumatized and, oh, now I feel great with this one. It's very easy to push some very important stuff to the side just to focus on Miss Perfect. And I've heard of guys saying, I went ahead and let my ex-wife take the kids, an extra week or weekend because I'm going off to wherever with the new gal. I'm like, oof, be careful. Work gets shoved aside and everything else. And then when that relationship, I was going to say inevitably, not necessarily, will probably fail, then you're left with, oh crap! Now I got to clean up the pieces of the mess that I've made from ignoring all these things for so long. For some men, not for all.
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Hey, this is Jude with a quick reminder about the Divorced Dadvocate Foundation for Fathers, which is our nonprofit that helps dads through divorce with legal education, free or reduced cost coaching, and mental health resources. If you own a business or know someone who does, there's an easy way to help by connecting credit card processing through our partner program. Part of the fees go straight to the foundation with no added cost to the business, and 98% of businesses are actually able to save money on their processing fees. It's a win-win. So if you know a business that accepts credit cards, get them in touch with me by sending a warm introduction email to jude@thedivorcedadvocate.com or give me a call directly at 720-255-1021. Right. Let's talk about your second point too, and that ties into what Ralph just said about our mission and as men, and that inherent masculine nature that we have to be on mission, and creating that vision of the world, and knowing or not creating that vision, knowing what our vision of the world is. And there's some tips, Shawn, that you can give the men in doing that, in working through coming to that understanding and knowledge.
For finding your purpose.
Yeah, finding your purpose. Yeah, understanding what your vision of the world is, where that aligns, where that falls in the spectrum.
Yeah, curious what you guys think, but I think one of the keys for younger guys in particular, if you're not one of those guys who's lucky enough to know why you're here and what you're supposed to be doing, is to do a little bit of experimentation, and you try different paths. And when you try something, you find out if you like it or not. And
yeah, so in my very pragmatic look at the world of relationships, I think one of the worst things a man can do is marry his high school sweetheart, because you have so much growing to do through your teens, through your 20s, hell, even into your 30s. Each decade, I'm just a completely new, different person based upon all these experiences I've had. And to have one person that you meet in high school, for example, and drag them along through all of those changes, and everything will be fine through all of those changes, through her personality changes and yours and your different way of looking at the world. Good luck. I find that the best partners are those that have been through all those things and have navigated all those turbulent waters of life and figured out exactly what it is they want and what their mission or purpose is. And I think they're far more likely to have successful relationships.
Yeah, I do think that the earlier you marry, the tougher it is generally. The exception to that is if each of you is very invested in a cultural structure, like a religion. Like if you're both Mormon and you're both committed to Mormonism, then that's a really great framework to work from. You're probably going to grow in similar directions. But something like that aside, it is tough to predict that the two of you are going to grow in similar directions unless you're really clear that you have similar values and you both want to go in the same direction. You both have a similar vision of the world and what you want to accomplish.
Yeah, I don't know what the statistics are about arranged marriages, for example, in some cultures. I think that they have a pretty good track record of sticking it out for decades throughout their whole life.
Yeah, and I have to imagine that there's some cultural framework there that supports.
Yeah, I would think so. Some constraints and parameters around the whole thing. Yeah, and
that's
so. John
Bon
Jovi, didn't John Bon Jovi? Isn't he married to his high school sweetheart? And I don't know anything about that marriage, and I don't know if I'm even talking about the right rock star, but I'd be really curious to know how that worked for them.
With a touring multi-platinum male musician.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm curious how that works.
Yeah. There's got to be some cultural framework that supports that.
Well, it's very interesting that you say that, Ralph, because I look back on my life, my dating life, my marriage, and then my post-dating life. And I think back and I feel like it would have benefited me to have married earlier in my life, to have taken that time, knowing, with the caveat of knowing what I know now. Now, that seems to be the challenge, though, and this is why I feel these conversations are so important. Your book is so important, Shawn, is that if I had somebody who had taught me more about relationships like I try to do with my daughters, to talk them through, and I always tell them, like, I'm not an expert. I'm just sharing with you all of my mistakes, basically, so that you can see and try to understand how to better navigate a relationship. But if I had somebody that was helping, and you talk about that cultural structure of families and being able to talk and share with them and guide them through that process. If I had somebody to do that, I think it would have been more beneficial for me to marry younger and be able to work through those challenging and grow together. Because at this point now, Ralph, you've been successful in a second marriage. I have not, and it's been over 9 years now in finding somebody. I find that navigating the waters now, it feels like, and obviously I can't go back and relive life, but it feels like it is much more challenging now than it would have been in my younger years, had I known a little bit more, but also had a little more guidance.
What is it about youth that makes it less challenging in your mind?
What is it about youth? What it is about youth is experiences can be problematic to pair bonding, that can be problematic to creating an environment and a life with somebody. If there's, and I think maybe some of this has to do with trauma, childhood trauma, unresolved trauma, a lot of the stuff that you talk about in your book, Shawn, with personality disorders, stuff like that, that mitigating some of that on the back end is because of the experiences that they've had in that time frame. Any thoughts on that, Shawn?
Say that again. Help me out with that one.
So it's more, it feels to me to be more challenging at this juncture in life, in late midlife, late 40s, 30s, 40s, because of all the experiences that people have taken from their lifetime and going through maybe previous marriages, relationships, whatever it may be, then trying then to come together and mitigate all of that, particularly with kids and family. And again, I'm talking specifically to dads, and try to work through all that baggage, if you will, but just challenges in order to find that spot where you can then go forward and have a healthy marriage and go forward.
Yeah, all that history is certainly, I mean, it's a blessing and a curse, because you know where you stand, but in terms of your values and your vision and your purpose, but at the same time, it clearly contradicts with you find out as you get older that what you're about contradicts to some degree almost what they're about, if that makes any sense. Like when you're 18, all the girls are a good fit. When you're 60, almost none of them are a good fit.
Yeah, right.
Interesting way of looking at it. Jude, going back to your point, is it almost as if you are saying, if I catch a potential partner early on, then there's a far less chance of life in the decades between now and 40 something to screw them up. I can be there early in the process of the courtship and everything else to mitigate some of the nastiness that can happen in the future decades, in the decades coming up. Is that what you're saying basically? Is catch them early and I have a better chance of molding them to the relationship that is best? Or
not necessarily molding them, but building together. So the mindset would be building together rather than a remodeling project. To use a guy analogy, construction analogy, that you'd be building something together. And while that is challenging, right? Because there's who knows where you're going to go, who knows what your passions are and your personality changes, et cetera, you can do that and build together. And if you're proactive, I feel like it's easier to do than going back and doing a remodeling project. I have a background in construction. It's easier to do a new build than it is to go back and remodel or scrape and do everything.
I think this is an excellent point to build on, to keep with the construction analogy. Shawn, would you say, let's say, when you look at the spectrum of things that could happen to a youngster that will affect them in the future relationship-wise, trauma, abuse, whatever it may be, are the chances that, let's use the age of 18 years old. You meet a gal at 18 versus you meet her at 40. Jude, you would say, man, I wish I met this gal at 18. It probably would have been, quote, easier. Well, Shawn, is it in your clinical experience that even 18, buddy, you're probably a little late. You need to catch them when they're more like 8 or 9 years old, because we're setting, we're imprinting a lot of things throughout adolescence and childhood and puberty and so forth. If you're thinking catching them at 18 is going to make things better, not necessarily. Where do you think?
It's such an interesting hypothetical. The person that you meet at 40 was a different person when they were 18 and they grew to get where they are, and would they have been a good fit at 18? I don't know. That's an interesting hypothetical, but I do. I like this concept of building together. That I guess the ideal couple is that they both come from someplace where good relationships were modeled for them, meaning they learned how to handle conflict and come out the other side, and they learned how to build things together. They learned things about shared values and so forth. So if both parties have that, and if both parties are on board with the other party's values, either because they were intentional about it and thoughtful about their choice, or because they got lucky, and they both want to build the same thing, then I think when you're in your 20s and you want to build a family, that's the ideal situation, because you've got the energy, and that's when we're supposed to be building families biologically, is early 20s. And so if you have all those things by way of foundation, then yeah, you're going to build something together. And frankly, I think this is how we don't really count successful marriages very well. My sense is that most marriages that start off that way with good shared values, either through intention or through luck, that most marriages work out pretty good. And part of it is they've built something together. And so it's not that they're each growing on their own. It's that they're influencing each other, and they're becoming more and more like each other as they go along in terms of values and purpose.
Mm-hmm. I often use
long-winded answer. Sorry.
No, I often use in my writing and stuff. I break it down and make it a little bit more technical in saying, when you're looking for a partner, you want to make sure that they have the.
To hear the rest of this episode and access the corresponding resources, visit thedivorcedadvocate.com and become a member of our community. It's free to join and will provide you with the resources you deserve as a divorced or divorcing dad. Thank you for listening. God bless, and I'll talk with you next week.